Hello everybody, PlanetWalls here. I just wanted to record a deck list video for the next round of the Classic League Invitational tournament. Maybe I'm not saying that right. It's the Classic League for 2012-2013. This is going to be the second qualifier tournament. In the first qualifier tournament, I made it to first place with the deck that I keep trying to insist be called Mishra's Birthing, despite everybody trying to call it Pod Shop. I've modified that deck. I've tried to take it through a couple dailies. Haven't had as much success. Last time, I actually ran into a bug where my Mishra's Factory mana sort of bugged out and took, like, when I cast an artifact, it used my City of Traders mana instead of my Mishra's Factory mana. I couldn't really avoid that situation. Then I couldn't equip a Skull Clamp to a Lodestone Golem. I think it contributed to a loss in a key game of a match. I ended up going 2-2. I beat, had some fun games against, I think Fishy Fellows playing Oath. But I lost twice to Affinity. And one of the Affinity lists that beat Mishra's Birthing actually cast a Memory Jar off the top and then found a Berserk. It was God Mode Magic. So you should check out his deck list, his Affinity list in Classic. It was pretty impressive the way he beat me. I went from something like 28 life and thought I was going to win the next turn to down to like negative 38 because of Berserk, which was actually pretty awesome. So I've been having fun with this format. For a Classic League Qualifier Tournament 2, I'm playing something completely different than Mishra's Birthing. I'm trying to play this mono blue list that tries to take advantage of the power of Frost Titan in the format, which Chris Cool and I are convinced is probably one of the best creatures you can cast, maybe even Oath into. It deals with the Emrakul in a lot of contexts. If they show and tell, their guy never untaps, basically. If you can cast it, you can mana screw someone, and it's very difficult to remove in the format because of its Ice Shield, quote-unquote, ability. So on top of that, when you have Counterspell backup, you let them pay the 2, and then you try to counter whatever they're doing to deal with it in the first place. So pretty powerful finisher that can be pitched to Force of Will. So there are some questionable things about this deck that I committed to, and I'll talk about those. One of them is Thirst for Knowledge, which isn't in here. Chris was trying to tell me, that's one of the best card draw spells ever printed, and I think he's right. But I find that casting card draw spells for 3 usually means I'm losing, and I never have time to cast them in Classic matches. So it would often get pitched to a Force of Will just to keep me alive, and I decided that having threats, something like Vendilion Click or Trinket Mage, for which I have a little bit of a corresponding toolbox, was actually doing more work. Again, I'm not sure how this is going to work out. It's another situation in which I had to submit a last-minute deck because of a conference I was at that same weekend. So I'll stop jumping around. I'll go through, not really card by card, but I'll talk about some cards with more detail than the rest. Wanted a deck that was pretty resistant against Wastelands, so large number of basics, and there are 7 fetches. Playing a Seat of the Synod, which is actually, I think, questionable. It's just to give me a mana source with Trinket Mage as an option. I'm actually not convinced that I should be playing it, to be honest. I'm not sure about it, because you also have Mana Crypt. If you really need a boost, you probably don't need a Seat when you can already cast something for 3. Though I guess off of an island and a Mana Crypt, maybe you want to find a second land or something. It's definitely an option. The Caracas essentially adds colorless for this deck, but on top of being a good way to combat different Shoth variants or Oath variants, it can also go quote-unquote infinite with Venser or Vendilion Click, which I'll get to. Mana Crypt is there because I'm pretty sure you should be playing a deck in this format that can take advantage of the most broken cards, including Mana Crypt and Sol Ring. And these help you ramp up into hard casting a Force, or to Frost Titan, or to activating something like Engineered Explosives, even casting Trinket Mage. So original versions of the deck, I wasn't actually running Mana Crypt because the life loss I thought was too severe. It is pretty rough still. I don't think you want to cast this willy-nilly, but I'm playing enough cards that have at least a colorless 2 in their mana cost to make this card much better than it was in an earlier variant of the deck that ran, actually, what's the name of that guy? I can't think of the name. Nurok Commando, I think. If you're unfamiliar with that card, I'll go ahead and bring it up. But he was a 2-of in an earlier version of the deck. And as I started changing the deck to go an even more controlling route, he became worse and worse, and I just wanted to pitch him to Chromax or Force Will. Chromax, which is gone from the deck now for other reasons. But this guy was in the deck. this gal, I guess. It's kind of hard to say. You'd be weirded out if you saw Nurok in person, I think, on Earth, in whatever plane we're in. But anyway, this guy I actually thought was effective in certain matchups. And in other matchups, it was able to trade at least with a 2-2 against Bears, for instance. But with Thalia, it gets totally destroyed. And trades with a Bob, usually, which is fine. But I decided to cut that guy because it sucks. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. So there's a 1 of Cavern. I was playing 2 of these, but I cut a 4th Frost Titan. I think that was right. Cavern helps you land these guys. These are all wizards, by the way. Every creature's a wizard, but Frost Titan helps you land them against decks running Force, and I think in that sense can be pretty devastating, especially as a Miser's like 1 of. There's a Tundra and an Underground Sea. These are another questionable include. There's a ton, and there's also the Caracas for white. The 2 white cards, or the 2 white producing lands, can help you cast the Porcelain Legionnaires from the board if you don't want to lose life. They also offer Engineered Explosives to be a little bit bigger. I think that 3 and 2 and probably 1 are the important numbers you want to hit. So having the option to be able to get to 3 is good, even if it can be disrupted if your opponent's ready for it. So here, originally the versions of this deck were running a lot of Preordains, which was actually surprisingly effective. But I felt like Chris and I sort of decided that not running the maximal number of Brainstorms in a mono blue deck probably meant you were playing the wrong deck. So we switched it to including a bunch of fetch lands, and basic island count is still pretty high. Fetch lands reduce your life total. They also reduce the number of lands in your deck, which you oftentimes don't want to do in this deck with Frost Titan. Preordain was sort of a different take on Brainstorm, but Brainstorm just offers you so much flexibility, especially in terms of hiding cards from their Thought Seizes or digging very quickly for something instant speed, all of which are good things you want to be able to do in a deck like this. We have a Trinket Mage package here. We got 3 Trinket Mages. They can search for Engineered Explosives here, which is sort of a catch-all removal for small things. Can also kill 0-drops, which is important sometimes against Chalice of the Void. Worth noting. It can also kill your own Mana Crypt, which has come up in test games. It came up in a DE recently. But the package includes a Grafdigger's Cage, Pithing Needle, takes care of Jace if theirs is out and yours isn't. Deals with Bizarre, which is important in the Dredge matchup. There's a top for the Control Mirror, can find Soul Ring or Mana Crypt for a mana boost to get in seat, as I said before. And there's some on the board too. There's a double Tormod Script and a second Pithing Needle. So we've also got, another card I was looking at, I should say this first, was Avarice Totem. So this card I would normally never think it's got one of the best / obviously worst arts of any card I've ever seen. And one would think this cost is, precludes this being a good card, but this format is so weird. Off of a mana drain, you might be able to do this and really devastate them, take their Emrakul or something. Because it's a Trinket Mage target, you can find it in a weird situation. I thought about including this. It didn't end up making the cut. While I'm talking about cards that didn't make the cut, and I apologize for the disorganized deck list discussion. There's Curfew, which I'm not sure anybody has played this in a while, but it offers a lot of interesting opportunities to deal with Oath again. And it also synergizes with Vendilion Click, Venser, sometimes even Frost Titan or Glenalundra, which I'll get to, and then, of course, Snapcaster. You can even cast it, Snapcast it, and then you still have your Snapcaster if you want. So there's that. Let's see. So Brainstorms are covered. Now this I wanted to include because of the nature of Classic League. You can see your opponent's decks. So there was an inherent advantage, I thought, in playing a number of one-ofs. There was a Daze in here at one point. Basically to give your opponent the idea if they're looking at your deck list that they have to play around a Daze or that possibility. And I thought that gave me a psychological edge. Tried to mimic that even though I excluded the Daze. I thought the Daze didn't work very well with the Frost Titan situation, even though I would consider it again. Just because you want to be able to ramp into this guy and bringing back islands isn't what you want to be doing. But Mental Misstep, Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, Steal, Sabotage, and Stifle are all, I think, pretty situational. But with that being said, they all offer incredibly powerful and surprising effects. Stifle on a fetch land is absolutely devastating. It can also counter a Wasteland or Strip Mine activation. Number of things it can do. Actually, I really quite like this card. I was trying to figure out a way to play multiple Stifles in the deck, but I just didn't find room. Maybe with some additional testing time, I could figure out how to tune the deck. All these cards obviously serve a purpose in varying matchups, offer a lot of flexibility. it's weird. There's a tension between running Snapcaster and these, because if one of these cards doesn't do much in a matchup, all of a sudden you have access to it twice, which isn't very good. But if one of them is explosive, or you play multiples and they end up sitting in your graveyard, it's almost like you have a toolbox again when Snapcaster is in your hand. Mana drains are actually incredible in this format, I think. Having an additional counterspell beyond Force is really good. They counter dudes and they counter non-dudes, both of which are important most of the time. They also give you a lot of flexibility to land a Glenalendra really early in the game, which can shut down some decks. Makes it very difficult to get around this guy. You can land a Jace or a Frost Titan very early. The number of times I've top decked a Frost Titan after playing Mana Drain just feels like I'm cheating. Because turn 2 Frost Titan, which has happened because they try to like force something. I don't know, whatever. Stuff like that happens and then they lose the game. Into the Royal is a nice catch-all. I find that the card draw option is good. It can bounce Spheres in the Workshop matchup. It can bounce Darksteel Colossus. It has some other options. You can bounce your own Snapcaster Mage. Snapcast it back, you know, does a lot. It's a pretty good card to have available. Trinket Mages and Vendilion Clicks. I've already talked about the Mages. Vendilion Click just strikes me as a powerful card that you can use to sculpt your own hand a little bit. It can trade with a Lodestone Golem, and it can win the game. Venser is a card I wanted to experiment with. I think its flexibility makes it really solid. It's another card that, if you have it in your opener, or if they try to show and tell you out, you can use this to bounce whatever they bring out. Glenalendra I've already mentioned. It's actually decent against some aggro decks like Hate Bears. It's not very good against Workshop, though. So I cut it in that matchup during sideboarding. But it's really hard for decks to get around, and because it can normally trade with 1 or 2 guys at the very least, in some matchups, I do like this card. Jace is, you know, he's famous, so he's pretty important. Another card that can disrupt show and tell. Forces are an obvious include in a deck like this. I sometimes board 2 of them out depending on the matchup. If I don't think it's really good. Against Hate Bears, for instance, you don't normally want to force their like crappy bears. You want to force, like, I guess either their Gaddock Teeg, something highly disruptive, or alternatively you want to force like a Path to Exile or a Swords. So sometimes I'll cut some of those in certain matchups. Dredge, for instance, I usually cut 2 of them. I try to keep some in there. Not sure if that's right. Sideboard, there's a lot of stuff here for the Workshop and Affinity matches, which I was pretty scared about. They've been pretty common in the DEs and have been doing really well. Then there are some slots against Dredge. 2 Tormod's Crypts against Dredge. Ratchet Palm comes in against Dredge. I think a Mental Misstep probably comes in Pithing Needle. I can also bring in Porcelain Legionnaires for other cards that don't do as much. And the logic of that is that I'm just able to protect myself long enough to Trinket Mage something like a Tormod's Crypt up and slowly win the game. It's not a very exciting match, but it's winnable. It's just, I mean, it just feels awful to play against because you have to play this different game where you're thinking during every tiny, like, place during each turn. You're thinking, like, what sort of triggers could be activated? What could he do? It's just you have to play a different game, and it's no fun to play against, so I'm actually willing to lose to it probably 50% of the time, given that I'm not playing a ton of sideboard hate for it. I'm okay with that. Ratchet Palms are good against Affinity, I think. They kill zombie tokens from Dredge too, but against Affinity you can sort of determine the tempo of the game, because it can kill Ravagers and steal Overseers, as well as Cranial Platings. It also kills Skull Clamp if you want it to, which is the most dangerous card that they can play, I think. Spell Snare is good against Goyfs and Bobs and Oath and Affinity for the same reason that Ratchet Bomb kind of is. Pithing Needle good against good in a lot of these matchups too. I normally want to name Bazaar or something equally powerful with that, or Skull Clamp in the Affinity matchup. They have a lot of trouble removing anything, so a card like Pithing Needle can be devastating to them, especially if they have like a multiple Skull Clamp draw. Mental Misstep helps me just refine what my deck looks like post-board. And having access to your opponent's deck list in Classic Quarter makes boarding a different sort of endeavor than it normally is. And being able to tune your deck very slightly like that, I think, is powerful. Hurkyl's Recall is an incredibly effective tempo card in both the Workshop and Affinity matches. And then a Null serves double duty, triple duty, I guess, against Affinity, Workshop, and Oath variants. All of which I expect to be common in this metagame. I haven't actually looked to be sure if I guessed right. I bet there'll be like 6 Oath decks, and then probably a total of like 10 Affinity and Workshop decks, and then probably like, I don't know, like 6 Dredge, and then the rest will be sort of like Delver Control. Porcelain Legionnaires, didn't talk about those. This was Chris's idea, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. So these guys are really good against Workshop because Lodestone Golem is the big threat that comes down. And what's interesting about it is they get through both Thorn of Amethyst and Lodestone Golem. And they're hard for that deck to deal with. So you can sort of defend the ground with Porcelain Legionnaires. The Metalworker variant of the deck is a little bit different. But I think you still bring them in most of the time against Lodestone. Metalworker variants, you definitely want to like go for the Pithing Needle play. Maybe Pithing Needle doesn't work on them because it's a mana ability. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't. I guess you just want to counter the Metalworker. Makes sense. Or just have Mana Drain ready to counter whatever they cast. So I think I answered pretty much everything about this. Other decisions you'll see me frantically trying to make while on the clock during sideboarding. And I look forward to playing this deck, even if it does look a little bit goofy and maybe underpowered. Not sure how this format works still investigating, and hope you guys enjoy the matches. Thanks.